it's super tricky to talk to prospects coming in the funnel about the platform as a whole, because usually they're coming in for one very specific thing, and it's not that people don't grasp it. People understand the inherent perceived value, I guess you could say, a platform versus product. But I've always kind of looked at it as like everyone understands the point solution, the Venmos of the world, right?
But I think very early on, it's just communicating what is your company narrative, to our point last time, what's your core positioning, what's your core messaging, what's, obviously the ICP, and then building on that vision and being able to tell that story efficiently, effectively.
Wow! Wow.
Hello, welcome back to Beyond the Valley podcast. I'm Madison and I'm here with Shyna. This is episode 2. So we got a whole 2 under our belt. We did the first one, which was great. We got some early feedback from our raving fans, aka family and friends.
Yes.
and
the best kind.
The best kind, yes, to be fair. Got some really helpful feedback. Like we said kind of in episode 1, we're building this, right? Like we're kind of learning as we go. So please reach out to us with that feedback. If you want to hear certain topics, if you want to hear more debate, more conversation, more ways of thinking, please just let us know.
We are in the arena a la Teddy Roosevelt. So it's a scary but also fun place to be.
Yes, totally. And I think it's very startup-y of us, right? Like we are MVP right now, episode 2. Here we go. I think in general, what's also funny that I'm noticing just as a trend is the last time in our conversation on episode 1, I think you had mentioned that you had a sick toddler.
Oh, yes.
And you were, I think, got up at 2 a.m. And I'm like, is this time?
Puked on.
Oh, and was puked on. Very important. And I personally did not go to bed last night until 2:30. I don't know why. I don't normally.
Because you were so excited to record the second episode of Beyond the Valley. I can
apparently
save you a therapy session there.
You saved me so much money. Thank you, Shyna. I must have been excited, nervous. I am a bit of a late night researcher. So I think last night I was sort of like on the dopamine brain high a little bit about the topic that we're going to talk about, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, I think it was just sort of like I was doom scrolling educational content. I'm not sure if that's like a thing that people do, but it's something that I do.
So were you just like how people used to do this on Wikipedia, right? They'd literally go down the Wikipedia rat hole and how many degrees of separation can you get to blank topic?
Yeah.
Like, were you just doing that on Perplexity or ChatGPT of just like, oh, and then we go this layer and this layer, this layer. What does that mean? Doom scrolling educational content.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Doom scrolling for AI should be its own studied thing because that is for sure what's happening. I mean, yes, there's also like educational content on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. But what I have been doing lately is I start somewhere. Maybe it's ChatGPT, maybe it's Claude, maybe it's Perplexity, like whatever it is. And then it triggers something in my mind and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go back over here to this other conversation and I'll swap between them. Like I'll have different tabs for each one of them going on different tangents about the exact same topic. And it's really interesting. Like it just spits out some stuff is overlapping, other stuff is a different perspective. And then I like to challenge it. Like I'll prompt and say like, great, now that we've had this conversation, like completely rip me a new one, like tear this conversation apart. What did I miss? Like what, and then I have it like tell me basically areas of opportunity or gaps in like how I'm thinking about things. So that's 2-3 hours easy.
What are you hoping to get by, to your point, juxtaposing multiple LLMs against each other?
I'm such a truther, I guess. Like the way that my brain works is I get really jazzed about finding like the root cause or finding like the truth about things. And so I think while ChatGPT, as an example, does a great job of making you feel really good. Like it'll say, I see where you're coming from on this. And yes, and it's almost like improv in a way. And I noticed that it gives you this false sense of like, oh, this information's accurate. And I
Interesting.
many times have come across where it's not. And I know that just from
It's not
previous,
interesting or it's not accurate.
no, not accurate. Or it's like,
Interesting.
because there's a lot of noise out there in the world,
Sure.
right? So like,
It's pulling from a source that isn't accurate and therefore
yes,
stating the inaccurate information as fact. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so
Hallucination.
it's is it a hallucination if it's pulling from
Well,
fact
if it's
again?
reasoning upon that factual, I don't
Yeah,
know. I mean, I don't know what
yeah.
the technical definition is, but I would assume O1 is, anyway, not to get super in the weeds here. I'm assuming it's driving conclusions, reasoning
Yes,
based
yes,
on
yes. So it's
inaccurate
very
accurate
interesting.
input.
Totally, totally, totally. Do you find that you are deep in LLMs lately at all?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, a longer one, because I see so much LinkedIn stuff today and I'm whatever social media that's just like purely LLM driven, right? And it's funny because we've been so resistant, call me a Luddite to it for so long because I'm like, oh, this sucks. Like, do people actually read this? And so the last few weeks, I've actually been experimenting with like having Perplexity and Chat GPT create like op-eds for me. And I usually just talk into it and just say, okay, create a blog post for Substack. And it takes me like 5 minutes, but I try to be as specific as possible. And I organize these thoughts. Okay, go back and put proof points. Go back and show examples. Drive analogies through this. Use emojis. Soften the tone. Harden the tone. Anyway, and it's amazing. I think it's so fast. It saved me obviously a lot of time. I think the challenge is it's lost its soul. And I know that sounds so like woo woo and art versus science, but there is something about like the beauty of like long form and the human, I don't even know what to say it, like the storytelling.
Yeah.
And to be fair, maybe I'm just not asking the right prompt. So it could be a Sheena problem. So if you're watching this and you figured out the true art of storytelling through LLMs, I want to know what you're doing, what you're seeing, I mean, one easy way to do it is to prompt it to write like another person's style, but that's not the point, right? Like the whole point is like to try to create something original. And as you and I know, like LLMs are literally built upon regurgitating information that already exists. So my point being, if I'm actually trying to write a net new op-ed, a net new point of view, a net new piece of thought leadership, whatever it is, in whatever format, LinkedIn post, blog post, Substack, email, etc. I don't want it to emulate, and I haven't, maybe a Sheena problem, written enough pieces to find my voice to train LLMs. But my point is, I don't want it to make it sound like some other thing. So, like you and I were talking about earlier this week, it's something I'm really struggling with of like, what is the voice? And more importantly, how do I create the space? And a little bit with this too, right? To actually find something that feels authentic versus just being like, well, that's going to hit because, that's what it's easy, and of course what the chat GPT or LLMs are aggregating and from other sites. So yeah, I don't know, push and pull.
Yeah, it's interesting because this actually really ties into our topic today on point solutions versus platform because point solution versus platform, which there's also another lens of like horizontal vertical, which we'll talk about in a second. But like, and we'll get to that. But I find it interesting because you're spot on, and I encountered this as I was doing this last night and throughout the week because there's lots of content out there on point solutions versus a platform.
Platforms.
Not all of it is very accurate as I came across in like my research and I think
Well, what's the top misconception, or what was the top inaccuracy? Let's put it that way.
well, I think that in general, the concept of like point solutions and platform, horizontal and vertical, are used interchangeably. And I am sort of like raising my hand as admitting to this many years ago. I also did this too. It's confusing. They're like kind of called one and the same. And so I
Yeah.
noticed in the prompting I was doing, it would spit me back out with something related to a horizontal, vertical point solution platform that I found not to be extremely accurate. So like, let me give you an example. With a vertical SaaS versus horizontal SaaS, one of the things that is, I guess, mixed up between there is like platform and horizontal are the same thing. And I understand, and I've even been there on like categorizing them as the same. And ChatGPT did that at first until I had a conversation with it and told it why that's not the case. And then it was like, oh, okay, I understand now. And it was able to pull different examples into those categories. So, like, for everyone listening, like, platform versus point solution, vertical versus horizontal. Like vertical is think of it as segment. Like vertical is targeting like one use case, one segment. Horizontal is very broad to multiple departments, et cetera, et cetera. Point solution is the actual like functionality, I guess we can call it, of like the software. Like Calendly is a great example. You go and you schedule calls, like very point solution. Versus platform is like you have an aggregate of stuff. I like to use the example of ClickUp. Like you can have tasks, you can have dashboards, you can have all of these different like product functionalities and jobs to be done within the platform.
Mm.
And sometimes they're convoluted. So they get very mixed up. And admittedly, I've done this in the past too, so I understand because it is a bit confusing. But
Interesting.
yeah,
So I actually disagree maybe a little bit with how, not, disagree is probably not the right word. I have a different perspective on
yeah.
point solution versus platform, but let's actually back up if that's okay. Like, why would someone even care about the platform versus point solution argument? And at what stage does that actually matter?
I would add a question to that. Who does it matter for?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think where it starts from, the origin that I often hear, and especially in talking with VC companies, is like the story in SaaS lately, the last maybe 10 or so years, has been go horizontal, go big, raise big VC money,
So
like
go platform is your,
sorry, platform. Sorry, yes. To go platform. Raise a lot of VC money, go platform. And people are missing out on the point solution kind of stuff, like the Calendly, so to speak. And it's interesting. I talked to a VC maybe like a year ago, and they were like, "Yeah, we're abandoning platform. Like we're going all vertical. We're really trying to do vertical point. Like do not go platform horizontal,
Mm,
please." So it's a really interesting change. So I think in general, the why I think starts from the inception of the company, and I think a lot of founders who are looking for VC money ended up going in that direction. I know a lot of either clients that I've worked for or
going in what direction? Point solution or platform?
no, sorry, into a platform. Yeah, before, right? Not now. I think now is kind of the age of like
I see.
vertical bootstrap point solutions. Like that's emerging in
I
SaaS.
see.
But I think in general, what I've noticed as a trend over the last couple of years, really like 10 years, not a couple of years, is that founders who are looking for VC money have to be platform horizontal. Like that is what they want. They want these large TAMs. They want like these really big audiences, make a lot of money, right? So I think starting from the origin point, that's what I notice as a trend. I think the other thing that I notice is from an audience perspective, like I think this is a little bit similar to the category creation stuff we were talking about in episode 1 is like, do people care about category creation? Do investors care about, right? Like each person has the different thing. So I think in general, and I learned this firsthand experience, like working at ClickUp, which is platform horizontal market, is like people don't really care. Truly, like they just don't care about like platform, how big the platform is, how many features you have, etc. It becomes overwhelming sometimes, and so you have to go in on a very specific use case, job to be done, and expand from there. The concept is easy to grasp, but in practice, like buying
Mm,
software is very hard, at least in my experience. I'm curious to hear your experience. Very hard to actually get the prospect to like
mm,
get gun ho about that. And then
yeah.
the last point that I'll add, and then I want to defer that question back to you and get your thoughts on everything, is from a user perspective, or even I guess you can call it a buyer too. It depends. In some orgs, the buyer is like really far removed. In others, like they're not. They're kind of
Mm,
involved in an admin way. But from an actual like evaluation
yeah.
perspective, what I often find is that platforms are more agnostic. And so while that's great, it requires a certain person to buy it. And meaning like they have to
Mm,
be okay adapting it to their workflow, and creating something from that agnostic sort of platform solution versus the
mm,
point solution is very specific. It usually has a point of view on how you should be doing something. And so you're coming into that platform uh, with your hands in the air, kind of going, tell us what to do. Now there's pros and cons to that, which we can talk about in a second, but those are kind of like it depends on who you're talking to on the why.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack
I
there.
know. I just
I
need
don't even know
more.
where to start. All right, let's start at the like 10,000 foot level. So macro trends, right? Over the last previous administration, with Lena Khan chairing the FCC, M&A effectively went to nil. And with M&A going to nil, that, to your point solution trend of, okay, let's just create something, get bought by Adobe. Let's just create something, get bought by Google. Let's just create this like really great shovel that solves this whole Calendly. Let's use that as an example. It wasn't happening anymore. The IPO market started freezing because of obviously, anyway, interest rates. And I'm not going to go into a whole macroeconomics lesson, but long story short, the ability to exit became more and more difficult. So therefore, instead of focusing a lot of founders and VCs, to your point, on like, okay, let's just go get these companies that can exit quickly, 5-7 IRR years to get positive IRR. Let's then go build some of these meaty platforms, right? I taking a step back, define it a little bit differently. So maybe we can start there just to make sure we're using common nomenclature. Platform to me is actually closed. So Adobe isn't a platform. Microsoft is a platform. Oracle's a platform. There's a set of developer tools. And this goes all the way back, not to like, for those who are nerds and care about actually the beginnings of tech and the different languages, it was literally close to the .NET, for example, with Microsoft, right? That was literally the language of which you code. Now things have obviously evolved and clearly AI is changing all of that. But the idea of a platform is I don't want to say traditionally like closed ecosystem of which like, okay, Salesforce, we now have the App Store, right? And you can build on our ecosystem. And obviously, we take Apple in a B2C extent. Point solutions to me historically have been more agnostic. And in fact, that's one of their differentiators, right? Like they say, hey, you don't have to be on the Microsoft ecosystem, on the Salesforce ecosystem, on the Adobe ecosystem, on the blank ecosystem. We work where your people already work. You want to use Figma, Canva, ClickUp versus Asana versus Workfront, go crazy, right? And again, like this is all changing. And to your point, like there's probably a lot of different opinions, and I'm not necessarily saying I'm right, but I think the TLDR on this, at least from what I'm seeing in the last few months, is because of the rise of obviously AI agents and LLMs. And going back to our previous conversation, what used to take a year and 5 engineers, maybe now taking few months and 1 or 2 engineers at that, right? To create a point solution that solves one specific problem. And those can now be like $1 million, $2 million ARR problems, to your point. And then, we'll see what happens, right? Is that play consolidation? So going back to now the markets have opened, right? And so they can get bought out and cash out, and then they go build the next verticals AI agent, and then et cetera, et cetera. Or, is it more of a traditional platform play where then you go to one vendor and they do all the things for you? So, which historically has happened. So, there's this whole like system of record versus, SaaS debate, right? That obviously Mark Benioff is, selfishly saying like, hey, systems of records are still valid, CRM is still valid for obvious reasons. And in fact, he's trying to lead the change with Agent Force. And then there's a group of people that are like, CRMs are dead. Systems of records are dead. You just literally ask your LLM, what's my quota this month? What's my target? Like how much do I need to close? What's the status with this deal, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's interesting to hear you bring that up. And I did not spend 4 hours last night reading this on LLM. So I'm very open to be educated. But again, going back to my Microsoft days, like I was my first job, very sexy SQL Server product marketing. We were a closed platform. The open platform was Linux, obviously. And literally every single month, I had a metric on how many servers. Back in the day, we used to ship physical servers. I guess we still do, but obviously more things are in the cloud now. And of those physical servers that were shipped, how many of those had a copy of SQL Server on them versus Linux? And then it's revenue share and something internal called a scorecard that we have that we literally track month after month, week after week, of course, quarter after quarter. And we also obviously had a huge developer evangelist arm. Remember the famous developers, monkey dance. But seriously, it was all about recruiting .NET developers to build on SQL and obviously Azure and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, like I'm not trying to give the history lesson, and I'm sure I'm like old AF now. But my point is, everything that's old is everything that's new again to some extent. And so I will be curious now that there are so many more languages. What does the standardization, because at some point it's going to standardize, right, to a few. And I think it's just going to accelerate the standardization, right? What used to take, obviously multiple decades, maybe it's just a few months now. There's going to be, in my opinion, as a standard set of platforms might be redefined, but it's just going to move so much faster. So I don't know. Tell me what the LLM and or Madison has synthesized that I'm completely off base on. But like I said, maybe I'm just old AF now.
No. I actually, my learner hat went on, and I actually have some questions for you. So when I hear open versus closed, I think open source versus closed source.
Yep.
Like
Linux, open source, right? Llama, open sourse, right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
DeepSeek, open source. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, it'll be really interesting to follow what happens with DeepSeek in the next coming weeks and months here. But yeah, I think it's definitely interesting. So from your perspective on the point solutions versus platforms, like what's your perspective on why people should care and like the different people why they should care? So like as an example, I think one of the things that I really find as a trend overall is there's a huge disconnect between like what investors and board cares about and wants to talk about. There's a difference between like what the CEO, especially if that's a technical CEO versus not, like there's so many variations in there, like C-suite in general. Then there's sort of like the people who are buying that software, like what do they care about? So what's your experience and sort of like how that differs between each of those people? Like, do they care about point solutions with this platform?
One of the first questions when I take on a new client that I ask the founder is, fast forward the clock 5 years. You are, ringing the bell at NASDAQ, the confetti is falling, your kids, your wife, everybody is in the audience, you're crying, you're stupid rich. What have you actually done? What have you built? What is the problem that you've solved? Right? And that is the platform, that is the ecosystem that you should be selling, in my opinion, to your investors and to the people you're trying to get to believe to go on this 5 to 7 to 10 plus year journey with you. So to use your example previously about Calendly, I would be selling potentially an Outlook or an Office vision. So today, all we do is scheduling an email. But because we're going to get so much data on how people are meeting, who they're meeting with, what are their trends, what time, blah, 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 we're going to use all this AI. I'm totally making this up. And if someone's from Calendly that's watching this, like they're going to be like, she has no idea what she's talking about.
Day right now.
I know she's not, and she quickly dismissed, unsubscribe. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, you got to sell the art of the possible. You have to sell vision. And so I would be saying, I'm not saying you have to go up against Office or you have to go up against Outlook, but I mean, I would argue like Slack, if they just started with like, well, all we do is we are chat. No, we are the center of productivity for all global enterprise. That's a very different story than, okay, we're just like Yahoo Messenger, but like the 2020 plus version of it, right? So to answer my perspective is, investors, people you want that, you hear about the Steve Jobs and those of the world. What is their top talent? It's that reality distortion field, right? It's that ability to convince these people that this thing that I see so clearly, you now see, even though it doesn't even exist. So I'm going to go pitch platform. I'm going to go pitch this bigger problem, bigger wallet that you don't see today, but there's a better way because of AI. There's a better way because of X, Y, and Z, the data, etc. But today, I'm just going to start with this wedge. I'm just going to start with this one use case, to your point, job to be done, or shovel a hole, whatever analogy you want to use or framework you want to use, that just gets us into the door, and then land and expand, land and expand, land and expand. And I think the second question I usually go and ask a founder or a CEO when I'm talking to them is like, so what exactly does your solution do? And like the amount of times, and we've talked about this, that people are like, don't look at our website. It doesn't actually explain what we do. Like it sounds
or it takes them 30 minutes.
There you go. It sounds so stupid, right? But they literally can't. They're like, we're a Swiss Army knife. We can do everything. We can do that use case and that use case. I'm like, okay, but like nobody cares. Like find the thing you're crazy good at. And to your point, that's the point solution. And that's what you lead with. And you go dominate that thing and you create raving fans and then obviously expand from there. Look, I'm not like revolutionary in explaining that concept, but it's almost one of those like, hey, what's a healthy lifestyle? Probably like eat more plants, less, right? And like a la Michael Pollan. So in practice, I find the discipline to be difficult. I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I think in general, one thing that I really agree with as a whole, like not even specific to point solution versus platform, like just in general, this leans back to the conversation we had in episode 1 about like category creation is like people like just don't really care, but it doesn't mean it's not important for the organization to be on the same page about what you are doing and the strategy and like go to market
And
behind
vision.
that. Yeah,
And vision.
exactly. So in general, I think like one of the things that I'm sort of like pulling out from what you said is like there is a world in which yes, you give the vision, you talk about platform, you do all of these things, but or I guess that's not a but, it's an and you also need to make sure that you're not losing sight of like the actual value here now today, like
Correct.
because it's very easy to get ahead of the curve. There's a lot of like they say the you know the concept of like ideas are cheap, and I only 50% agree with that. Like I think most people can produce ideas, you know, brainstorm with chat GPT. Sure, yes, the barrier of entry is pretty low. Are those ideas actually solid? That's like another, you know, debate and discussion on that. But like in general, right? I think like vision, the barrier to entry to pitching a vision is very low.
Yeah.
A lot of people do it, especially if you are inclined more from a personality lens to be like a salesperson, whether or not you actually have sold things, but just like your personality wise, like being a salesperson, pitching something, that helps a lot in creating that vision, even if maybe the tangibleness isn't quite there. But, and sorry, I'm going to use and again. To your point, when you're talking about like point solution, the job to be done, the thing you're actually doing, if I'm understanding you correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, like the actual value of the solution today to the audience, right? Is that what you're kind of saying is the point solution?
Yeah. I think the easiest way to visualize this is platform and apps. So Apple is a simple example that all of us can relate to. You have a core platform and then you have an app store, right? And so where do most B2B software companies start? They're actually building apps, aka point solutions. And then as they grow more and more apps, they eventually have created the platform organically to support those apps. So to use a Marketo example, obviously we started to B2B lead management. Then we built in text slash consumer marketing. Then we built in mobile, right? And then we built in like web. My point is when I started, we were just like one solution. We were a point solution. Then we expanded to the platform, marketing automation platform. Then we became a platform with 5 apps. So my point is that is the natural evolution of any B2B company. And most founders either start with the huge vision of 5 apps because we can do everything, or the Swiss Army knife,
Yeah.
or they just are very narrow and like we solve this one thing and they've lacked that vision. And so I think the most successful, I should say, at least from a vision perspective, companies in terms of articulating clearly the problem they solve and being able to bring people along have been able to flex high vision. I'm standing on NASDAQ. This is the platform I built to solve this pain point for marketers, for salespeople, whatever. But they've also figured out the wedge and the apps from which they start.
I see. Okay. Now this is all coming together for me. So I think we're kind of saying same, different a little bit. Like what I mean by that is like how I typically, my biggest lesson that I learned when I was at ClickUp was like I defined ClickUp as a platform, meaning that it has multiple different products or point solutions within that platform, right? So like as an example, if no one's heard of ClickUp before, it's like productivity tool. I like to say that it's project management plus. It helps people kind of wrap their brain around it. The foundation of how ClickUp started was task management, project management, but it built on top of that because at the time, now
Yep.
everybody's doing this, but at the time, you had the Asanas, the Jiras of the world, like everybody was fragmented. And so the vision of the platform was like bring it all into one place. Now everyone's doing all in one, so it's a little bit crowded and noisy, but at the time it was, kind of this more revolutionary take on the market. And I think one of the interesting lessons that I learned there was the concept of, I call it product versus platform, and maybe it could be argued as point solution, but like as an example, a product inside of ClickUp is dashboards. A product inside of ClickUp is whiteboards. A product inside of the ClickUp platform is task management or whatever, right? So it's very, in my opinion, and just from my experience, it's super tricky to talk to prospects coming in the funnel about the platform as a whole, because usually they're coming in for one very specific thing, and it's not that people don't grasp it. People understand the inherent perceived value, I guess you could say, a platform versus product. But I've always kind of looked at it as like everyone understands the point solution, the Venmos of the world, right? It's kind of
100%.
like
Yep.
how I look at it.
Yep.
And it's super tricky to talk to prospects coming in the funnel about the platform as a whole, because usually they're coming in for one very specific thing, and it's not that people don't grasp it. People understand the inherent perceived value, I guess you could say, a platform versus product. But I've always kind of looked at it as like everyone understands the point solution, the Venmos of the world, right? It's kind of
100%.
like
Yep.
how I look at it.
Yep.
And I love using Venmo as an example. In fact, I love using Venmo against PayPal as an example because they're both point solutions, but the common thread, and yes, you could argue they have small, intricate little features that are a tiny bit different, but overall, like from a broad sense, right? Venmo and PayPal are very similar. They send and receive money. Like that is the job to be done within it, right? What's different about it? PayPal, first of all, came around first, and the segment is completely different. Like Venmo is young people sending money to their friends, and you have a feed that has emojis on it. Like it's very it's as much as that core job to be done is similar between the two, the point solutions are very different in terms of like the segments that they serve. Which actually brings me to my next point, which is like, how do you view vertical versus horizontal
Yeah.
in terms of point solutions and platform?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, but I just want to come back to that one thing. You brought up like the concept of products within a ClickUp.
Yeah.
It's interesting just listening to you talk, and obviously I don't nearly know the teardown of ClickUp as well as you. If you want to think about nomenclature, to your point, I think there's a ton of confusion around that because when I think about like nomenclature using my platform and apps model, there's almost like the apps are the products, and then the features within the apps are the capabilities. Right. So some of the things that you listed off and you're like, oh, those to me are products. It's interesting because again, I'm definitely not as close to the ClickUp solution, but I'm like, oh, those are actually capabilities within these apps, within obviously the productivity plus platform or whatever language we want to use. But I think the net takeaway there is like, I've seen this from seed up the way to public companies. There's so much confusion within the company between product, marketing, and sales around feature, capability, product, platform. You can imagine, to your point, how even more confusing that is than for buyers, analysts, investors. So my point is invest the time to like actually create a common set of nomenclature. I have a point of view. Obviously you do as well. I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, but it's just important because otherwise you start using that stuff interchangeably. And like maybe that's the whole theme of this episode, like getting really clear on definitions, because everyone will have a tainted view based on their own experiences and where they grew up working, and obviously the approaches that they've had.
Totally. And one other thing I'll add to that too is like I have a strong point of view on the fact that you need to get everyone in alignment. Like that is my strong point of view on this. I think as much as I have my own point of views, and I've seen this, by the way, like I've seen people use horizontal and platform interchangeably, like I said, throughout LinkedIn, like very, very smart people who, do frameworks very well, et cetera, et cetera. However, in my personal experience, both as a W-2 employee as well as a consultant, the number one thing that I see create more disturbance in an organization is actually just lack of internal terminology. So like you can call it blue for all I care. We just need to know what blue is. When everybody
Yeah.
says blue, we need to know what we're talking about. And you need to have that consistency from a messaging point of view. When you go into a pitch with a prospect, like make sure everyone's using the same terminology to describe like what you are, what all the different things are within them. Like that, in my opinion, is like numero uno priority above
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah, 100%. And so to your point about horizontal versus vertical, I think I was saying I see it a little bit differently too. Like to me, a horizontal platform is almost like what's the old adage they say about the gold rush? Like the people that really, really made money were the people that sold axes and picks.
Oh,
Right. So horizontal is like axes and picks. It's the tooling, it's the infrastructure for everybody to go achieve X. Verticals, to your point, more industry based. So a quick example, I'll go back to SQL because we used it, and I know SQL doesn't really exist in the version that I worked on. Obviously, it's in Azure now. But my point being, like, we had SQL as a platform that could do fucking a million things. Right? Like you obviously mostly IT pros and developers and are using it. Database administrators are using it, but it's Excel on steroids. You can literally use it for 1,000 million use cases.
yeah.
Now, what the vertical play would then be is like, okay, well, what is the pre-built template for financial services? What is a pre-built template for manufacturing to do? What is a pre-built template for sales, et cetera, et cetera. I'm oversimplifying for the sake of this podcast, but my point is like that's actually how we went to market too. We would have horizontal teams, and I think at a smaller startup, you'll see it translate to technical product marketing, segment product marketing, or inbound or outbound product marketing. And obviously at those big companies, the Googles, Microsoft, Amazons of the world, it's, inbound and outbound or technical and, segment product, whatever. It doesn't matter. The language is, again, going back to nomenclature, potentially interchangeable. But I do think there's a level of maturity if there are certain industry needs that are unique. Healthcare, financial services, highly regulated, government. Clearly, you need to have be on the schedule. September is the fiscal. Anyway, education. There's certain nuances with that. SLED, state local education. There that to me is vertical plays. And if you take that in the context of a SaaS company, tofu mofu bofu. So then it's very focused from top all the way down to the exact salesperson who's closing. Or just going to go after financial services, for example. Is that different than how you kind of think about vertical, or are we more aligned there?
No, I think we're aligned. I to summarize, make sure I'm understanding. I look at it as segment based. So vertical is like for a very particular industry or niche, right? So like to your point, like the
Yeah.
healthcares of the world, and then horizontal is going broad. So and I think one of the interesting things about this, and this is where things get a little bit convoluted, is like it's very easy using the project management example again. There's a very specific project management tools for the construction industry, right? And also, you can use a Monday or a ClickUp or other
Or
thing,
an Excel sheet.
or an Excel sheet, right? Oh, status quo, as we
Yeah.
talked about in our first episode, always
Yeah.
going up against status quo. So, yeah, I think there's like a messy middle, I guess, to all of this
Yeah.
because, like, I think for sure it's very easy to wrap your brain around like the vertical sort of business.
Well,
Very
that's where the AI agents are coming in, right? Like that's everyone saying we're building vertical agentic AI
right.
to go solve one specific need because it's obviously so easy now to go and build that. And so to our earlier point, will that then consolidate? To your point, will we then have one Procore that every single construction company uses that does everything from sales to marketing to accounting to reconciliation to project management? Or do we have like 5 point solutions that do one because it's so easy to build now to do one slice of each of that specifically for the construction industry. And then you have really, really smart people in house that then have to go stitch this baby and architect it.
Yeah. Do you find that you tailor your pitch differently based on if it's vertical versus horizontal or not really?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Um, it's interesting. There's certain industries, and I'm curious what you think, where it's inside baseball. I have a client
Oh,
at Inside Baseball. So I'll give you an example. I have a client who literally their job is to, at the world's largest car manufacturers, so like the ones that you were thinking above, GM, Ford, Hyundai, Volkswagen, the way they make money is the line has to run for creating cars. And inevitably, there's like, 10,000 suppliers or whatever for one car, and parts show up broken, miscolored, wrong sizing, et cetera, et cetera. And you need, believe it or not, manual people to sit there and sort good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. And like, obviously, that's something that like you don't know maybe until you show up to work that day, or you don't show up, until it's last minute, is my point, right? And so let's take that vertical of OEMs is what they call it, right? Traditional OEMs for vehicle. Like there's a small network of people that have been doing this for 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years. And you can come up with the best pitch deck in the world talking about the big change and why the time is now and tease the promised land, a traditional SaaS formula, and you're just falling your face. Because at the end of the day, these people who, like I said, like they've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, there's certain things that they hold to be true. And that's the whole product marketing magic of like going to spend time with these people at the plant and understanding like, okay, you're like hairs on fire all the freaking time, like literally a plant, and you have 8 lines going at once. And if one goes down, then that hurts your productivity. And like literally corporate is just literally looking at every single plant being like, and obviously with the unions, and there's a lot of cost cutting pressure. Anyway, more than you ever care to know about OEM. But my point is, like, from a product marketing, messaging, positioning, to your point, like horizontal, vertical perspective, that's obviously very clearly vertical, and we can even sub-segment within there. It's focused. I found the pitch to be much more focused on how they historically have sold that solution. So, like, you, when shit hits the fan, because it's basically what it is. You need someone you trust. You need someone that's worked in the industry for 20 plus years, has a good reputation. Like, it's a different way of selling is my point. And again, that's like not traditional SaaS, right? So you could argue like that's an industry play, but my point is like, this client does software. I should have started there. Like they do the manual piece, but they have software where they're like, because you're signing QR codes of good, bad, and then you're feeding that analytics up. So anyway, my point being like just being very conscious of by industry and more importantly by buyer, like what is actually going to move the needle for them to act now. Going back to why category, why company, why now, why now.
yeah, the why now is, you'd be surprised. Like I would say, I don't know the exact percentage, but I'm gonna guess 80% of clients I've worked with usually don't have a why now story.
Yeah.
And that's like usually the top thing that I have to work to try to, talk with customers about and do deep research about and try to find what that is and drive the pain home. But I think from me with I used to have a different opinion on this and I'm slightly changing it now just based on sort of the clients that I've been working with. I used to do quite a different pitch for vertical and horizontal, and I'm starting to not do that. And I started to not do that while at ClickUp actually, because I found that the horizontal came later, like the expansion pitch and also working with the product team on actual like usage um is so different than the initial pitch going in with like usually you're talking with one person. You're talking to a marketing director, you're talking to a head of product, you're talking to like whoever that target audience is. Like rarely there was some, of course, any company you go and work at is going to sell like that multi-million dollar deal to that big person who's like roll it out everywhere, make change management, do all the things. So that's rare. Like in companies, people, especially now, but in general, people buy software very meticulously. And the larger your organization, the more risk is involved, or even just the contract longevity that you're signing, whether it be multi-year or whatever, the risk is high, right? Perceived risk. It's always something we're going against as a product marketer. And you could argue as a product person too. Um, And so in my opinion, in my experience, what I have found is that the horizontal market is good internally. Like we want to go after all these different segments. We want to do lots of things, which is fine, except for in the specific time talking with a prospect, usually that prospect doesn't really give a shit about anything else happening outside of their department, the problem that they're solving, doing all the things. Um, and so I've really started to tailor my pitches to be, I don't want to pigeonhole to say vertical, but I'm kind of going there,
It's
like
apps. It's
very,
app focused.
yes,
It's very
very point
whole.
solution.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very much like what exactly you, Tom, nice to meet you. How you doing? What problem is your specific marketing team encountering right now? This is our exact solution to that. And then I think where I see things kind of go awry is like the expansion play, because it's really easy to get someone in the door, but to prove value to other people on the team that may not be using that solution is a very hard challenge. Once you nail it, it kind of is this like continuous framework you can implement. But I don't know. That's and again, I'm always playing with this. Like I think every client, you probably argue the same thing. Every client's different, and like you learn something new with each client and team that you work with, and a different approach and a different perspective on things. So for me, I'm always playing around with this, and it's just kind of a recent thing that I've been starting to do that I've seen resonate a little bit more in the cycle, if that makes sense.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
again, it's case by case.
When do you think a company should hire a W-2 person versus like a consultant to kind of figure out the pitch for horizontal versus vertical, or to your point, land or expand?
Good question. I think in general, the people who are on your team as a W-2 employee are going to have the most depth. They're going to have the most knowledge about not only company context, but also the product and like what you guys are trying to sell and do. I think the benefit to having a consultant come in and do that is they're not privy to any of that prior information. And
Mhm.
so, therefore, you have an external point of view that isn't getting clouded and muddied by the internal dynamics. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've talked with W-2 product marketers where, let's say they're going to do like, I don't know, something really big, like a homepage message redo or a pitch, a new pitch deck or whatever it is. And by the time it reaches the final state, they're like, this isn't even like look like what I started.
Marketing by committee.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's like product marketers are just in this really hard spot internally.
Yeah.
And like in general, like W-2 employee, like we all have to pay our bills, right? So like at the end of the day, like people say yes to things that maybe they disagree with. This is like the interpersonal dynamic of organizations, right? Like many people say yes to things to keep their jobs, to make their boss really happy with them. Like there's so many different factors going on inside of an internal organization. And while you could argue the point, oh, consultants also need to pay their bills, and of course, yada yada yada. Sure, that's true, but it's not as like interpersonally complex, I think, as a W-2 employee, and therefore a consultant is able to go in and really challenge, I think, and it's the how I see it, the job of the consultant to challenge like the
Yeah.
status quo of the organization and like how they're
Mm.
thinking and how they're processing the world, and also bringing in that external experience. Because I think one of the perks of being a consultant is like you work with so many different people, and like a lot of my career has been early stage startups that have grown very rapidly, um, and you learn a lot during that. And yet, consulting is its own beast of like
Mhm.
learning rapidly because of how many people you work with and different industries and different products and all of these different things. And so that has its strengths in seeing the world, the industry, all of the different things from a little bit of a different lens than maybe someone who has been at that company for the last 4 or 5 years, right? Whose bread and butter is that company and that knowledge is valuable, but maybe they're not in the best position to challenge or to give the outside perspective on things. Did I miss anything? Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think I would add A lot of product marketers, myself, well, I'm going to take that back. I'm not going to put myself in this bucket. Um, I was one of the few people that graduated from college and went straight into product marketing. So, but two things are true. One thing is that product marketing means something different at every company. So obviously when I was at Microsoft, that means something very different at Marketo and obviously the clients that I have. And number two, there's a lot of people that have fell into product marketing, right?
Oh,
They
yeah.
were in sales and they want to become product marketing, or they were in product and they want to become product marketing. So my point is a lot of W-2 employees who hold a product marketing title may not have deep domain expertise of what product marketing is. And you add on the complexity of, like I said, it's defined differently. We just talked about inbound, outbound nomenclature, horizontal segment, etc. Obviously, I'm going to add in another dynamic, which is like large company, small company. And so I agree with everything you say. The one piece is acceleration. When you have someone who has deep domain expertise in product marketing across multiple industries, across different sizes, etc., they can move 10 times as fast many times than your own team. Not because your team isn't smart, not because your team isn't motivated. Yes, there's the political stuff, but it's often just because we have more tools in our toolbox and we've seen more and we can pattern match faster. And so, to your point, a big messaging and positioning project that would historically take 6 months, 8 months, because we need to get her approval and his approval and their approval, etc., can actually go to 2-3 months because we write it in 2 weeks and then we iterate and we launch and we treat it like an MVP and we can kind of go from there. So I think that's the key thing, especially at early stage startups. It's the acceleration and time to execute and get rapid feedback and they keep going. I think a lot of people, especially early, get stuck on like, well, what do we call ourselves? And then like, what color? And like, at some point, it doesn't matter. Just go, just launch. Talk to your point about the whole, and hire these deep domain expertise that can move lightning fast because that's actually more valuable, right? Than the time saved. I mean, and the learnings gained. Than taking a slower, more steady route depending on where you are.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the point of W-2, and I'm almost even seeing it through the lens of like an org structure for whether you're platform, point solution, horizontal, vertical, different stages, different sizes of company, like all of these are like the nuance factors for whether you bring on consultant W-2, how you structure that. Um, I think I can speak to my own experience coming from like the startup world. Is that typically product marketers, to your point, every product marketer is a little bit different, right? And I think what I've noticed is the uh, generalist sort of product marketer, and I hate to say that word because like marketing manager is a generalist and should be different than product marketing, right? But I think that there's an overlap. So like as an example, right now I'm working with a client where I do product marketing, and it's a direct to consumer company. And there is no general marketing person. And so typically, in general, product marketers aren't the copy people, right? Like, I think there's people who are really, really good at specific forms of copy, whether it be short form for ads, long form for like blogs. Like, there's different variants of copy. The larger organization you have, the more niche and specific you'll get. You'll have one person who just writes emails, right? Like, they're
We
really
talked about positioning and messaging and copy in our last episode. So
yes.
to your point, historically, copy has not sat in product marketing.
Correct. Yes. But the company that I'm consulting for right now, I do that for them. I do copy as well as the positioning, messaging, storytelling, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that I'm coming from the startup world a little bit more used to flexing into that, whereas I think other product marketers kind of have like very firm lines in the sand. I'm curious where you stand on this, like very firm lines in the sand. I'm like, I don't do that. Like hire someone else. It's not what I want to do with my time, which is totally fair. Um, but I think I also noticed this trend of consultants being used a little bit more than like, I know there's like a consultant big bang happening right now, just like in terms of the market and the industries of both like B2B and direct to consumer. But I'm noticing more and more consultants being brought on as like almost interim support rather than like doing a very specific task. For example, creating
Yeah.
that messaging and positioning doc, creating the pitch, like a very specific, tangible
I
thing.
think those are really hard gigs, in my opinion. Those are really hard gigs.
Yeah,
You know,
they
it
are.
can be more political, to your point, and you don't know where the where the bodies are buried, which is obviously a good thing, but it can also create a lot of like, oh, I didn't even know that's what product marketing does here, to your point about copy. Or like, I didn't even understand that this person needed to be a reviewer and approver, and he or she throws a hissy fit that like this thing launched to sales without their approval. And I think that is some goodwill to some extent that gets built up with a W-2, right? Because like you are part of the team, you see them at happy hour, reverse happy hour on Zoom, at SCO. My point is there's these opportunities to build a relationship. And then you assume generally good intent, right? And then you're like, all right, let's figure out what the process is. And then there's this person who comes in for 3 months, it's the expert at what they do. And like, or, and then they F up and they don't follow your process, probably because they didn't know there was a process and or there was no process, and they're trying to create a standard process which doesn't work for your organization because of your unique snowflakeness. And I have found, and I'm actually have shifted a lot of my consulting to exactly to your point, like we're going to come in and we're just going to do messaging positioning, or we're going to do company narrative. I mean, it's all married, right? My point is it's like this big it's outcome driven is my point, versus just like keep the lights on for 3 months, all right.
Yeah.
And I think it leads to better outcomes on both sides for both myself and the client, in terms of setting expectations of, hey, at the end of this engagement, this is, what you can expect. Having said that, every single one of my consulting clients has had me stay on longer than the original client. Not because, I mean, I'm sure part of it is I'm awesome, but also because, like, as you know, with product marketing, as you're peeling the layers of product launch, oh, did you also know we have absolutely no pricing packaging strategy? To your point, oh, did you actually know we don't have a land and expand deck story message strategy? So inevitably you peel the layers and there's more to do. But I think starting out with a really clear MO of like, these are the outcomes that you will deliver to the organization. And more importantly, it gives you as a consultant power to actually go in and make change. Like the most frustrating thing is like when you come in, what best practices are. And to your point, you want to move to my earlier point, you want to move fast and you want to bring in these best practices. And then you're just hitting resistance. It's because you're not aligned with power, right? So it's the founder, the CEO, the CMO, whoever that is. And so, yeah, that's kind of my thought of like, I know there's a lot of people who've made a wonderful business of doing that, like I'm covering for you while you're on mat leave situation. But I personally have found that work to be less satisfying for me. I'm curious your perspective.
Welcome to my internal dialogue and battle that is constantly going on in my head. I think there's pros and cons to both. I think that like one of the one of the things that I really love about interim positions is the feeling of being part of a team, and it feels like it's just a personal preference. I really feel great when I'm working with very smart people and we're all sort of in this like go team go, like pushing for the finish line, short bursts, right? This can't go on for a long period of time, but like I think this is why I gravitated towards launch in my career just as a product marketer. Is like you're gearing for this moment. It's not that things don't happen after that moment. It's just more of this like evergreen paced kind of way versus, launches that have a moment. Not all launches have a moment, but launches that have a moment in the market kind of converge on this point. And you're all working towards that together, and I really love that camaraderie sort of aspect. So I have enjoyed that portion of interim. However, the con to that is the lines get really blurry very, very quickly, and pretty soon you are kind of being seen as a full-time employee, like a part of the organization, not just here in an interim way. The contract more often than not expands a little bit further than like what you initially signed on for. And then it just sort of you're just sort of here and you're like, wait a minute, how did I get stuck in this position? I'm like a consultant, but I'm doing full time. Like it's sort of this I'm the type of person where I want very strong,
Good fences make good neighbors.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's such a good quote. Good fences make good neighbors. Yes, that's exactly what it is. That's a
Yeah.
great analogy.
Yeah.
Whereas for a W-2, I'm sorry, not for W-2, for a consulting gig that is very specific, right? And coming in
Yeah.
to do this very specific
Yeah.
thing for a short amount of time. It's great because there's that built-in boundary, so to speak. Like you
Yeah.
were there for that one thing. No one's pinging you about random crap that needs to happen in the organization,
Yeah.
um, which is great. But also, I found to be the con a little isolating, a little bit sort of like you just kind of go in, you do the thing, and then you kind of go out and um, I sometimes really love that. And other times I'm like, "Oh, I feel like something's missing." So it's this
Yeah.
internal debate inside of
Yeah.
my head. And I want to share this like super transparently for anyone listening who's um thinking about consulting or even doing a little bit of consulting now and figuring out like if they want to stay in it. I think it's like worth painting a very clear picture of like what it looks like to actually be a consultant, because when I first got into it, I kind of fell into it and I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I had sort of this idea based on what I had culminated
Yeah.
across LinkedIn and all that stuff. And so I wish that I would have had this information. So that's part of the reason I'm sharing this internal debate that I'm having in my head with all this stuff is like, a question to ask yourself if you're thinking about consulting or staying in consulting is like, do you really need to feel like you're part of the team? Do you really need to feel like you are able to have a say in how the whole marketing team thinks about things? Are you okay being a point person for one particular thing and not being involved in anything else? Are you okay dealing with bad processes or bad other things and putting on the blinders and just being like, nope, not my problem. What's that phrase? Not my circus, not my monkeys, right? Put on the blinders and you do your thing. Like you have to really make that call
Yeah.
for yourself.
Yep. I hear you there. To our first episode, figure out the shit sandwich you're willing to eat
The shit
too.
sandwich.
Yes. Bringing this back to the first half of the conversation,
Yeah.
ready for the hot take. My hot take. Ready?
Yeah.
I actually think that in this new world of agentic AIs, where obviously we're moving much faster with leaner, smaller teams without having to raise bajillion dollars, and to your point, to our earlier point, verticalizing, product marketers will come in and basically pinch hit as from a consultant perspective because you don't need someone to come in very in depth, at least early, right? Maybe as you grow and become a platform, you need someone to figure out like the strategy and stuff. But I think very early on, it's just communicating what is your company narrative, to our point last time, what's your core positioning, what's your core messaging, what's, obviously the ICP, and then building on that vision and being able to tell that story efficiently, effectively. Now, obviously, as the company grows, as you build more agentic AI agents, agentic, there we go, and have full true agent force, say that 16 times fast, obviously there will be a time to expand. But I think that like there is this appetite now, given true product differentiation, to lean less on the FTE W2 product marketing role to tell that story. It FTE W2 product marketing really took off, in my opinion, in 2020, 2021. Not to say product marketing wasn't always around, but like you really saw that explosion in need because SaaS was becoming less and less differentiated. Now, with more true product feature capability, differentiation, you just want someone to come and tell your story very effectively versus having to be like, well, how is this different than, this competitor and that competitor? I'm not saying that's not important. My point is like you're actually competing with business as usual. And so you just want someone really strong to be able to position you against that. There's less competitors in ecosystem. So ClickUp, let's use that example. There are probably, you would know more than me, hundreds of
Thousands.
thousands of productivity, right? And at the end of the day, they kind of all do the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure, to your point, there's a thing nuance here and there to your Venmo and PayPal example. So you need your strong ass team of product marketers to help you sell a multi-million dollar contract. But now you're doing project management differently. So it's really articulating messaging and positioning versus business as usual, which in this example would be ClickUp, right? So anyway, that's my perspective of like how product marketing will evolve. ebbs and flows. History will repeat itself in the next few years.
Interesting. I will slightly disagree with one tiny micro part of that.
You can disagree with all of it.
Which is, I think that there's basically zero product differentiation in the market right now. Like I just, it's very difficult to talk to someone who's trying to buy a product and they have their spreadsheet. They come in with their spreadsheet. They've gone around in their organization and they're like,
even with agentic AI, though, like in our example of like construction, agentic AI solution that just does general ledger management for construction companies. You think that there's like 5,000 companies that are not differentiated that do that one thing? Verticalized agents?
I think an opportunity is in verticalized agents for sure, but I think the barrier to entry to literally completely copycatting that, like I don't believe in first to market. I think that has happened in a few rare occasions where like being first to market has actually proved to be valuable to that. But in general, like fast follows, sometimes like often enough for it to be statistically relevant, like end up beating the first to market in a lot of things.
So you're saying like in this agentic world where it is easier to develop, the moats have disappeared. The product moats at least have disappeared.
Yeah. Because what used to happen is like it was very hard. Like you had to get a computer science degree. There weren't these boot camps. Like you had to get a computer science degree. You had to be very knowledgeable in these things. And now it's like, especially with AI assisting, like you can create anything your imagination dreams.
So see, I disagree with you completely. I think in AI, the differentiation is the data, is obviously the training data. So if you're first to market, you get richer data, like obviously there's the open data set of the internet, but I'm talking, let's use our example of like you creating a general ledger specific reporting agent. If you're first to market, you just had more bats, you have more beta customers, you have more data, and your training is more accurate. It's more blank. I'm not saying first movers are always going to win. I want to be super clear about that. But I do think in this rapidly evolving world where data is truly an advantage, that you have more advantage with first mover than fast follows.
I see what you're saying. So I think we're saying a similar thing, maybe different nomenclature. How I describe product is like functionality, and I don't consider personalization as part of that. So like an example would be like Hulu versus Disney versus Netflix, right? They all do the same thing. Like you go on and you stream, and like there may be little tiny features and UI that's a little bit different between all of them, but like the thing that makes them is actually like the data, right? You go onto your Netflix algorithm.
Content. It's the content, right? The algorithm and the content that they feed you.
Correct. Yeah, it's the two together. So it's a personalized experience, right? Netflix on its own as a product, it's not revolutionary, and
100%.
That's why so many people have done it. So in general, I agree. I agree with the point you're trying to make of like AI being this wrapper, I guess, for lack of a better term, right? And so it's not the AI. I mean, yes, we're all AI crazy.
Yes.
We want AI, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But like, there's not. It's the experience you have with that AI, and it's a similar reason why people go to Perplexity versus Claude versus ChatGPT versus all the things. They're all technically the same. They have some features and functionalities different. Like I really like ChatGPT, how it has that memory bank, and that's a little bit different. So like there's some stuff, but in general, not hard to copy. Claude could do that tomorrow. Perplexity could do that tomorrow.
Yeah, but I would argue it's because they're training off the same data set. So going back to a vertical agent that does a very specific job, if you move first, you have access faster and a broader set of data than anyone else to do that one specific thing. And so that's why, in theory, a flywheel, I would argue you would win. I agree with you, right? There definitely is a like UI and UX piece of this. I think like 50%, if someone can fact check me on this, of like the training data is synthetic anyway. So my point is it's like man-made, right? I mean, all data I suppose is man-made, but my point is like, if you're going to go truly vertical, you need a very specific set of data that's not available on the open web. You need to plug into existing general contractors' systems of record or API, or through APIs, and that is not on the open web. So in a world where the data is proprietary, whoever gets access to that faster and is able to process it with more insights, I believe, is in the best position to win. And that is more true, in my opinion, product differentiation than, to your point, like, and that becomes a moat, right? Anyway, but we'll see, right? And that's why I think there's like this flurry of VC money going after these agents as fast as they can, because to your point, there will be multiple winners, right?
Yeah.
But I do think like moving fast gives you access to data.
Yes, I do. I do think there's a huge, we're seeing this already with enterprise SaaS, right? It's really hard to move once you've established something. Workflow, or
100%.
probably like whatever it is, right? It's very hard to move off. You don't want to start from scratch. So I do think there is some absolute validity to the point of like, you know, the data. It's the same reason I don't want to delete my Netflix algorithm, right? And they keep raising.
I know couples that buy 2 different Amazon Prime accounts for like $150 a
Yeah.
month because, to your point, the history, and also they don't want each other. They don't want each other to know what they're buying. So I was just like wild to me. I'm like, it goes to the same freaking household. Anyway,
Listen, I can speak to this pain because I share an Amazon account, and let me tell you, it's a pain every time I log in because everything else is so personalized. Like um, someone asked me to share a Spotify account, and I literally was like, no, because don't mess up my
you got to
algorithm.
do the 5 whatever friends and family. Anyway, but yes,
Yeah.
we digress. We digress.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
personalization is important.
So the
but
personalization aspect, and AI could facilitate that. So I do see what you're saying. I think I nomenclature wise categorize them different. I'm thinking product is like functionality versus like the
yeah,
experience being personal
yeah,
and the journey,
yeah.
like all that kind of stuff. I totally agree. And it's very interesting to see how this comes in because I think macro wise, what I'm noticing in terms of pitch, everybody, they're really smart, great people out in the world who are also, noticing trends, and so they'll put that into the pitch deck, right? And so I know one of the things that I did at ClickUp and was very common for a lot of people is like, great, there's a lot of apps, right? We exploded and we had all these like point solutions to your point of like all these different things. And now there's a problem that stems from that, right? And then there'll be a day where we talk 2 years from now where the initial pitch deck that we were talking about for like AI and personalization, now everybody's doing that. So now you need a different way to stand out in the market. And now we're going to be talking about, great, what started in AI was this, and then we migrated, V2 was migrating to all of these agent solutions, and now
you have a solution to manage all your agents.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the evolution and the cycle were just kind of like
well, you could argue the companies that win are the ones that are playing chess versus checkers. So they're already talking about the agent management problem and are already building and talking about the platform play of like, hey, you're going to have all these agents sprawl. And so we're the single source of truth that manage all of that for you within construction. I keep going back to the example because it's very niche, but and that's where obviously a good product marketing can come in and help you tell a story. But having said, I totally agree with you. Like, you and I could probably spend quite a bit of time and hit the books and experiment and build a general ledger for construction AI agent, to your point about feature differentiation. But I think moats are now going to be built more around data, obviously, and learning models, and then also just community. And that's a whole other topic that we can probably cover another time. But you're seeing I feel passionately about this anti-establishment, anti-brand, anti-corporate movement happening. And so it's really going to be, I don't want to say by the people before the people, it's going to be more populist, even how we think about stitching together our software tools.
Yeah. Taking it back to kind of, combining AI and the point solution versus platform, where do you see those AI agents fitting in with the conversation of platform versus point solutions, vertical versus horizontal that we've been talking about?
Yeah, if we oversimplify the model to platform and apps, then in theory, an AI agent is an app with multiple capabilities. And then the platform becomes like the core data set / differentiation for your agent being better than my agent. The question will be interesting to see. And we're still very early, right? Terrible baseball analogy, like first inning. In companies of like who in terms of actually adopting agents. But anyway, my point being, we'll be curious to see, do I buy one company's agents that does 10 different things for me within marketing, or do I buy one agent across 10 different companies, right? To go and do these tasks. And I have a point of view on that, but I'd be curious how this actually plays out.
Yeah, I think it's changing so frequently that it sometimes makes it really hard for a product marketer to stay on top of it too. Cause like where AI, I mean, it's unbelievable how fast it's moving because what was it, 23, early 23, I think the first ChatGPT model, like public model kind of came into play. Am I thinking of the timing right on that? Was it 23 or 24?
I don't remember the exact date, but you're definitely in the right range when OpenAI was first open and then it became closed AI.
Did you see his I don't know if it was a Reddit response or a tweet or something, but Sam Altman was like, "Yeah, I think we may be on the wrong side of history with this, and we're gonna like debate, internally on how to
Hmm.
reprioritize this." So
Probably one of the most self-aware things I've heard him say.
yeah. So it's interesting. We'll see where it goes. But anyway, in I think it was early 23 when ChatGPT first came out to today, like so much has already changed and I think it'll continue to change. So I think maybe one takeaway too for anyone listening, whether you're consultant, W2, whether you're founder, whatever, like revisit this more often, right? Because I think in
Yeah.
general, like people talk about product marketing revisited every 6 months to a year, right? That's like
Yeah.
the average that you kind of hear people talk about.
Yeah.
In practice, it's 1 to 2 years. Like that's how I've typically
Mhm.
seen it. People rarely revisit at 6 months, even though that may be best practice, so to speak.
Or when a
So,
new VP of marketing comes in
oh yes, yes. Oh, we're doing
or CMO.
revamp of brand, revamp
Brand,
of positioning, get a new
website.
website. Yeah. Tale as old as time. But yeah, I mean, what would you recommend to like if founders listening to this, maybe they are developing a point solution AI or even just integrating AI into their existing um, ecosystem? What would you tell them in terms of how often you should be revisiting like the core value, status quo of the environment, like everything that goes
Yeah.
into the strategic narrative and differentiation of the company?
Find a bucket of money, an initiative, a strategic goal to attach to within the buying group that you are selling to. And every time that strategic goal changes, change your messaging. There's too much messaging out there that becomes, to your earlier point, nice to have versus need to have. And it because there isn't a clear bucket of money that this associates to. Simple example 2, 3 years ago, every CMO had to go to the board with an ABM plan. Often that meant buying an ABM solution, demand based, 6 Sense, et cetera, right? So they did a wonderful job, demand based, 6 Sense, et cetera, of attaching themselves to a bucket of money that their chief economic buyer was responsible for. So in my AI agent world, AI agents need to solve a problem that already is a top 3 to 5 goal that a C level has that is hopefully responsible to the board for. And every time that initiative changes, your solution doesn't need to change. Your messaging changes of how you solve that problem. So, to your point, sooner, because probably business is evolving and growing, and productivity is obviously accelerating, minimum quarterly, but keep abreast to your economic buyer. What do you care about this quarter? What do you care about this quarter? Oh, okay, it's growth. Okay, I'm gonna talk about growth. Oh, it's cost cutting. I'm gonna talk about that. Oh, it's talk about it's cybersecurity and like the tech sprawl. My solution helps you with that too, right? And look, I'm not saying the Swiss Army knife is the approach. My point is being actually very, 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 very targeted to the pain point that the bucket of money is already allocated for. It'll just make everything so much easier, and you're not selling nice to have.
Yep. I think that's a pretty good mic drop moment for the entire podcast. I can't imagine a better way to like end things and wrap things up. That was, we need to get a little soundboard, I feel like, where it's like, have you seen those podcasts where they have the live soundboard? It's like ding, 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 do, 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 like whatever the like announcer buzzer is like in sports or things like that. Obviously, I don't watch sports. You're way more
That just comes up from Louisiana, and I care way too much about LSU football. But it's funny because my husband is into F1, and like no one cares about F1. I guess they do now after Drive to Survive. So he's like, "Oh, you're just bandwagon fans." So, and that's how we watch LSU football and F1. So we're kind of losers.
Oh my gosh. F1 has taken over recently. Like it came out of nowhere. So yeah, totally. It's the bandwagon. It just ebbs and flows as with everything
It's
does.
that Netflix algorithm, my dear.
It is. It's the Netflix algorithm. It's coming for you and the Instagram algorithm.
Well, hold on. Platform and point solution. Netflix created amazing points. What did they do? They took that model. They created the golf version. They created the track version. They created the tennis version. Apple created the surf version of Strive to Survive. Right? Which is amazing, genius. They basically verticalized that market. Genius.
Ding, 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 ding. And I made my little board that's like ding, 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 just so that if anyone's listening, they can scrub through and just go, when does the ding, ding, ding happen? Those are my key takeaways of like all of the knowledge drops that Shyna says, and I'll just highlight them with a little buzzer in the background. This was a really interesting conversation because I think that one of the takeaways that I'm kind of hearing from this is like there's so much to be learned in all of this, like platform versus point solution versus vertical versus horizontal. There's so many great examples. There's so many unknowns, especially as we go into AI. And I really loved the ending point that you had around just staying really, 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 really close to the customer and like not letting their goals differ from like the value that you're providing.
Yeah.
That's like a really good takeaway. As always, please like, subscribe, share, do all the fun things. Email us too.
We like long form conversation. We have a lot of opinions, obviously.
Well, I'm trying to keep us in time, and I'm like, gosh darn it, I have so many.
We could go for another hour, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. But
Shyna and I, we really kind of have this brainstorm doc essentially where we talk about like different topics that we may want to, converse about, things going on in the world. So please email us, I guess, and tell us like what you want to hear. We'll add to that doc and we'll make sure that the things and the topics that we're talking about in here are relevant to not only the market, but the things that you're encountering day to day, week to week in your organization. So please do reach out, like, subscribe, do all the things. And until the next one, we'll see you later.
Bye-bye.